Okay, good morning, everyone, or I say that every time. Hello, everyone. Don't know if it's morning where you are. Thanks for joining today's Tips and Tricks webinar. This is our continuing series on how to run your checkpoint environment more efficiently. Today's topic is on lessons learned from security workshops. Please use the Q&A chat if you have any questions during this webinar. Our presenter today is our manager of security architects for the East. He's from here in PA, Dan Taney. Dan? What do you have for us today?
All right. Thank you, Rob. Happy to be back doing tips and tricks. It's been a little while, but looking forward to present this to everyone today. So very briefly, if you're not familiar with what security workshops are, one of the things that my team, the regional architects, do we do security workshops with our customers. This is a free of charge engagement that you can work with us on, and we do a very holistic review of the whole security estate of your organization, not just talking checkpoint, but really anything and everything as it relates to your cybersecurity and cybersecurity posture. So what we're hitting on today, and I'll just start with, if my clicker wants to work. There we go. Just a quick disclaimer. For those, I've done a session similar to this a long time ago. This is an updated version, I think, with some much more and more relevant examples. So just real quick, because these are experiences from workshops that we've done, I'm not going to be using any customer names, obviously. And really the goal of this kind of session is to point out just where we've seen some gaps in security controls during these workshops. And I hope that everyone can just kind of learn, take some things away from this. Hopefully you take some notes, things to go check out and look up and, see if there is anything you could do to kind of harden your environment from what we've seen from these other examples. So I always try to make this stuff entertaining and not just death by PowerPoint. But I don't want anyone to think I'm confusing that with making making fun of or making light of the efforts of the people that we worked with on these workshops, because we want everyone obviously to feel comfortable working with us, and we're not trying to just call anyone out. So this is really here for everyone's benefit, for everyone to try to learn from what we found. And then of course, if any of this looks interesting or you're concerned what might be lingering in your own environment, we can come in and do one of these for you. All right, so let's get started. The first example, and this one is pretty straightforward. This really doesn't come from any specific workshop, but something we've been seeing and talking about a lot, because as you'll see in a minute, how it relates to some pretty relevant topics in cybersecurity today. So when I did this in person, I asked for a show of hands. I don't have the panel up. You don't actually need to raise your hand. You can do it at home if you like, whatever. But just think to yourself, if I ask, does your current security policy, whether it's your firewall policy, some sort of layer 7 app policy, are you blocking users from accessing things like internet-based DNS, anonymizers, perhaps personal VPN clients? I'm going to use Facebook and Instagram explicitly here, but let's just say in general, for the sake of conversation, any social media sites, personal email, webmail, other SaaS services. And so far, you're probably, yes, I think most people are probably saying we block these things. How about ChatGPT? This is really what has brought a lot of this conversation to the forefront lately in talking about controlling ChatGPT access. So maybe you're blocking all of these things, but how about QUIC? Are you blocking UDP 443? So if you're not familiar with what QUIC is a protocol that was built by Google over a decade ago, and the original intent of it was really around streamlining content delivery and faster transfer and transmission of data over the internet, because it's leveraging UDP instead of TCP. So this started out for a while as just a Google service, but a lot of other things have adopted it. And if you haven't kind of pieced it together, a lot of these next-gen HTTP3 apps, like the ones I have on the slide here, are all common adopters of the QUIC protocol. And some of that is, because it's just a streamlined, easy way. And some of it, honestly, might be because it can be a little evasive. So the reason we're talking about this is if you're not blocking UDP 443 and you think you're blocking these types of applications, you actually may not be. because we found a number of instances. Where, depending on the layers and order of your rules, if UDP 443 is being allowed before all of your application block rules, it's a good chance this traffic is exiting your perimeter, completely missed by your app control, and being allowed. So the lesson learned here, and again, I'll say this is a good time for me to drop the second disclaimer of the session, which is everything I'm going to talk about are general recommendations. So please, I encourage everybody, investigate and look at the individual use cases in your organization before you just make sweeping changes. So please don't go and do things just because Dan told you to, please. But you may want to take a look at where UDP 443 is being leveraged in your environment, if it's egressing your environment, and where it is layered in with your app control rules, because there's a chance that you may think you're blocking things that are not getting that are getting through, even though they shouldn't. And we've heard from a number of folks now where we've talked about this during a workshop or some sort of review, and they've gone ahead and blocked QUIC, and then they've seen a huge uptick in the amount of other applications that suddenly start getting blocked. Because the nice thing about QUIC is when you block it, it will revert back to TCP 443. So once you make that service unavailable, so far, and if there's any exceptions, then there may be, you can please call me out on them, but I've seen so far, most of these services will revert back to TCP, and once they do that, back to a format that is not, that is inspectable by Checkpoint or by whatever your security solution is. So something to keep in mind, because we're talking a lot about generative AI these days and a lot of ways to control access to it. And QUIC is a big piece of that. All right, so let's move to something a little more entertaining and relevant, than just blocking ports. So this one, I think if you saw the session I did, almost like a year and a half ago, this example was in that, but I really like this story, so I brought it forward because I think it brings out a lot of relevant controls and things that are important to talk about in a lot of folks' environments. And this workshop we deployed some sensors on the network, we deployed NDR, and we got to the point of the workshop we were discussing remote access and VPN, and then particularly as it applied to third parties. So when we were talking to this customer, found out some vendors in scope for third-party access included folks doing their physical security monitoring, HVAC, and there even was an MSSP involved that had remote access to help do break fix, things like that. What the NDR sensor found was a myriad of remote access tools, web-based remote access tools like TeamViewer, GoToMyPC, and then we were also seeing a lot of VNC traffic on the east-west feeds of the sensor as well. And so, we got talking to them about this because the customer honestly was not fully aware of the tools that were being used. And the reason for this was that the vendors told them that basically they were required to allow them to install their tools and their tooling on, whatever workstations that these vendors accessed. And the customer really didn't have a whole lot of say in it. And even worse, we found that the MSSP was using a single service account for all their technicians to access the customer's environment. So something like MSP admin or whatever it was the one that every technician was using, regardless of who they were, what they were doing. And then this is where the VNC came in. We found out that the MSSP was using the free version of Real VNC, default settings, no encryption, and the same static password to allow them to move laterally across the network to do that remote support. So a lot of kind of not good stuff here. The irony is, as we were going through this engagement, the customers, the rest of their security policy was great. They had great posture. They were very well protected on their perimeter, had a multi-layer approach when it came to most of their user security controls, and even a really good internal network segmentation strategy. But, as we've seen in a lot of cases, these remote access tools quickly became or could become the weakest link in somebody's cybersecurity program. So, you think you've got everything locked down, your users are very well controlled, your perimeter is defined, and then something happens and you're left asking the question, who could have penetrated my impenetrable fortress? and of course, being potentially these random remote access tools that maybe you didn't even know about. So kind of the lessons to take away from this, please do not allow your vendors to dictate or mandate exceptions from security policies. They're your policies. They're often driven by your compliance requirements. It is that don't allow that to kind of become a conversation where you're just kind of bending to their will to, make them happy and make their lives easy. And the reason is a lot of these web-based remote access tools are regularly still a common vector for infiltration. And as we saw in this example, otherwise very hardened networks. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of times because users can self-install or self-provision them, so they're not federated to the identity providers that the rest of our security tools and remote access tools are. Many may not support or require use of MFA. And I think the biggest one, and there's definitely some examples we can point out here where we've seen this in the real world, they can be very susceptible to social engineering. If you've ever used TeamViewer or seen TeamViewer used, you just get the TeamViewer icon and down the system tray. And a lot of times all you may need is that desktop code to get into that system remotely. So it's very easy for someone to call a user claiming to be from the help desk or claiming to be from somewhere, and they just need that code to check something on their computer real quick. And, very easy to kind of socially phish that from the user. So really the recommendation here, standardize on a set of remote access tools for your vendors and third parties that meet your security objectives. That's one of the cheap checkpoint plugs here. A tool like Harmony Connect could be ideal for that issue. That is the thing we've recommended, in so many workshops and seen adoption of, to get that quick, easy, zero trust, least privilege access rolled out to your third party vendors in a way that's secure and auditable. So there's that one on remote access. This next one I really like. This one was a little bit of a different type of engagement. We did a workshop, but they also asked us to include a third-party IoT discovery vendor as part of the workshop process. So we deployed NDR, they deployed their sensors. And when we got the first report back, something caught our eye very quickly, that there was a finding of potentially rogue network equipment. And they've identified this as something appearing to behave like a piece of network equipment, not from a typical network equipment manufacturer. So we jump on their switch and take a look. And the thought is, of course, my thinking, oh, this is just, they're misclassifying the MAC address. They don't have the vendor right. So we go back and look and see, and I'm expecting that we're just going to find some weird access point that the tool misidentified. No. That's actually not what we found. What we found on the other side was a GE air conditioner. What the hell does that mean? Yes, Frank Costanza, what the hell does that mean? What that means, as we found, someone had modified or hacked or whatever the firmware in this device to broadcast and spoof the SSID of another wireless network in the environment. The difference being this, the air conditioner sat on a different VLAN that had completely unfiltered access to the internet. So the usual SSID was heavily filtered in a completely different zone. But if you connected to that network near this device, you were getting completely unfiltered, uncontrolled access to the internet. So pretty interesting. And kind of in here as well, we also found NDAA 889, Section 889 banned devices, which we'll talk about in a second if you don't know what that is, but also printers with high critical vulnerabilities. And I think this kind of spoke to a lot of the posture of the IoT in this environment, and probably how the air conditioner got hacked or manipulated in the first place was likely a vulnerability that wasn't patched, or default credentials, or both. So some lessons learned from this example. IoT ICS SCADA devices. These things are on your network, whether you realize it or not, and depending on what you consider IoT, printers, light switches, thermostats, TVs, smart TVs. There's so many things. These devices should always be deployed to dedicated networks and dedicated wireless SSIDs that are firewalled off from the rest of the network. I would encourage you to define narrow access rules as possible on these VLANs. And for things like ICS, SCADA, a lot of that automation, machining things, consider denying access to the internet entirely, because a lot of those things don't even need internet access. They really just need to talk likely back to other PLCs and things on the network locally, and they generally shouldn't be phoning out to the internet. Also, if your wireless infrastructure supports it, leverage rogue access point detection. Your wireless vendor may call it something else, but this is basically the wireless access point's ability to detect when SSIDs that are nearby are spoofing or impersonating ones on your network. Some manufacturers can even take steps to block this and basically kill the signal or block out the signal coming to those, not let devices connect to them. So consider the rogue access point detection if you've got it. And of course, the lesson from this workshop, really, this engagement started around because they wanted IoT visibility. Get IoT visibility on your network. Make sure things like default credentials are not being left in place, and that the devices are being kept up to date. Because again, I'm going to assume that it was admin or something like that left on this device that left it at risk in the first place. And then finally, whether federal governance applies to you or not, you might want to take a look at NDAA Section 889 and potentially don't use devices for manufacturers that are listed on here. So you can Google this, but real quick, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. If you weren't aware of this, these are some of the vendors, ones you probably recognize: Hawaii, ZTE, Hikvision. Hikvision could be a big one. They make a lot of low-cost cameras that could be used in security systems. So that's one that we found a lot of times when we start doing workshops that folks maybe didn't even realize they had. And of course, just to be clear too, I'm not making, this is not a political statement. This is not political or social commentary. So if you just making folks aware, this list exists, and whether you have federal compliances or not, this may be something to keep in mind. So you can look it up, find the full report, everything that's on it, and evaluate the value of that and how it relates to your environment. So the next one, this one I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but again, I think there's some good value in kind of the conversation that came around this example. So this one was a mobile device on a network that our NDR sensor picked up. And what caught my eye about this one right away, and I'll blow this up, hopefully you can read that, and if you still can't read it, I'll try to make it even bigger. What really caught our eye on this one, first, of course, it was a device phoning out to China. This was a sensor sitting behind another firewall. So the customer thought that this traffic was being blocked, but we were still seeing events of it being allowed out. So the geoprotections were not completely effective in this case. But what really caught my eye this time was that we were identifying this as an Android rootkit C2 communication of a specific Android malware family. And, in a lot of the workshops I've done, all this traffic we've seen in NDR, I have not really come across too many instances where I legitimately found mobile malware sitting on a network. So, we wanted to take action on this, get the customer looking into this, and hopefully find this device and get it off the network, or at least block its MAC address or do something to keep it from phoning out. So it's interesting, you can see this was just an HTTP post, and there were some other things like the Android version, some sort of SID ID, and this BSSID, some other just telemetry type things being phoned back to the C2 server. So, we had looked, and this had persisted for days and days on the network. So this wasn't just like a fluke drive-by. But, it kind of showed us and showed the customer that, this mobile malware stuff is real. And it's an area that a lot of folks, maybe have not gotten to focusing on yet, but it's out there and it's really happening. So I promised I wouldn't spend too much time on this because I want to make sure we get through the next one. But, really the obvious one here, and I think most people these days have gotten to this, is that the segmentation of guest and BYOD devices is critical. and that you want these devices, these networks, segmented entirely from internal resources. That's kind of the, obvious part of this. But the other thing we're seeing, and I think the important takeaway here, is I would also recommend that you ensure these guest BYOD networks don't share common infrastructure. So things like DNS, DHCP servers, don't use the same DNS and DHCP servers that your corporate networks use and rely on for your guest networks, because there's so many DNS-based attacks that a mobile device that comes on the guest network, if it's sharing DNS, potentially start doing things to manipulate that DNS server, the one that you trust, that that you kind of, your business is built on, and could cause other problems. So if you've gone the lengths of segmentation, I would encourage everyone, stand up a different DNS server, stand up a different DHCP server in those environments. Or if it's just strictly for internet access, just point all your guest users out at something like Google DNS, OpenDNS, Quad9, any of those, and don't even bother with an internal resource, because there's really, if it's truly a guest network, no reason why things should be communicating and needing internal DNS resolution. So kind of riding alongside that is that this lack of meaningful mobile device threat prevention is probably what I would say the second biggest gap that we're seeing when we do these workshops. There's an overwhelming amount of data that kind of supports this, that mobile attacks are not, we're not preventing them and potentially not really taking them too seriously. Thinking importantly here, 59% suffered downtime from a mobile attack. And I think interestingly, 46% from this, I think it's a Verizon study, had other devices compromised as the result of a mobile attack. So we're seeing that here, 46% of lateral movement. So the mobile device was sort of the first point of infection, but from there, based on network design or other design, we saw lateral movement into the network to cause other interruptions like data loss, regulatory penalties, and downtime. So I would encourage everyone to really take a good hard look, whether you're corporate owned or BYO or both, at mobile threat prevention and how we can start working better at reducing this attack surface, because it's very real. And, like I've said, folks would likely not roll out a laptop or desktop to a user without EDR or endpoint, some sort of endpoint protection on it. Yet we continue to do that regularly on mobile devices that access a lot of the same business critical information that those laptops and devices do. So something to think about. Last example I have, and this one, there's a few steps, and I wanted to use this one because it kind of gave us, it gave a bit of an example of how we walk through, or how you could walk through troubleshooting and triaging an investigation and an incident that you might find, and how to look and see whether it's serious, whether you're affected, or if this is just more noise in your logs. So again, this is another NDR sensor that's sitting behind another firewall. And this one was interesting because I saw traffic coming from North Korea, where and don't worry, I'll make this bigger because I know it's an eye chart, where the user agent of the traffic coming from North Korea was identifying itself as Hello World. So this seemed really strange. And we're looking at this and seeing that there is this payload on this GET sent to this web service, and it's targeting the loopback address on port 80, and it's clearly some sort of Linux command line injection. And we could see what really jumped out, this wget from this IP address to download a file called lol.sh. So, all right, we've got a weird device calling itself Hello World as its user agent, North Korea. I need to know what lol.sh is, so I want to look at this a step further. So I take this IP address over to VirusTotal, and we could see 17 out of 95. So it's flagged as malicious by some vendors, but there's still not actually like a huge consensus on this IP. But the next thing I noticed looking further down, last known HTTPS certificate was for secure Wells Fago 1L no R. This clearly looks like at the minimum, this IP has been used for some sort of phishing. Looking further down the page, I see that in the user profile here, a very similar looking post to the one we saw to the web service at our infected or at the site with the NDR appliance. I see the same wget to that IP address referencing lol.sh. So there's clearly some sort of persistence and regular thing happening. This is not a one-off. Again, not some sort of random drive-by. There's some bad stuff going on with this site. So then I really want to know, I have to know, what is lol.sh? What is this, apparently hilarious bash script? What's this bash script and what is it trying to do? So then I fired up one of my sandbox VMs and try to pull the file down. Unfortunately for me, Harmony Endpoint did a good job and blocked the file. So Checkpoint's Threat Cloud already knew about this IP address. And we were considering this to be malicious by anti-malware. But I really, really, really wanted to know what was in lol.sh. So I fired up another VM that had no antivirus on it and could get the file. Interestingly enough, I see now that this script is really just downloading now multiple versions and variants of the same xd.x86 or xd binary. And what really jumped out at me on this one was that this file is representing multiple different compute platforms. We've got x86, we've got MIPS, we've got ARM, we've got PowerPC. So there's many versions of this XD loader, which, these were all, I'm realizing, often common platforms for IoT. So maybe this is some sort of IoT attack, but it's very persistent in the fact that almost every CPU architecture is covered. So very clever, very, clever in that this thing really wants to infect us. Even Muldoon was impressed. So what is xd.x86? This was kind of the final stop. xd.x86, as it turns out, is part of the Mirai botnet. And if we looked at the kind of attack chain of Mirai, the SSH part was a little bit different. This was HTTP, but in the final steps of the attack, download this binary, execute. This is exactly what we were seeing. And sure enough, further down in this investigation from this analyst, we even see the payload drop. And by this point, the payload drop should look very similar. We've got the wget to an IP address, that xd86, and then execute. So it becomes very clear at this point what we're looking at is an artifact of the Mirai botnet, either another infected host that is trying to spread itself, or someone from North Korea specifically targeting this IP address, trying to spread Mirai. So the good news is, didn't mean to do that yet. The good news is this system was not vulnerable to Mirai. So we were able to determine, it was attacking, it was knocking at the door, but it was not successful. So the interesting thing was when we tracked this back, the customer actually thought this server had been decommissioned over a year prior to our workshop engagement. So we got very lucky here that this attack really did not move into that server and then laterally into the network, because the inside of the network was pretty flat. But this brought up some very good points. And a lot of it was around, the importance of decommissioning and kind of reviewing your firewall policy, reviewing that, when you have a standard process for decommissioning retired servers and applications. If this server had just been shut off when it was supposed to be taken out of commission, this likely never would have happened, and we never would have even seen this this attack begin. Please, services like TCP/80 should not be exposed directly to the internet anymore. Minimally, you want everything using TCP/443. If there's an unencrypted version of the page, don't expose that. Don't NAT it out publicly. Clean up all of the insecure stuff, because it's just ripe for being targeted. And regularly audit everything that's exposed to the outside world. So that would include servers and services, but also check your NAT rules. Check to make sure that potentially someone didn't decommission one server, build another server with the same IP address, and now you've got some legacy NAT rules that never got cleaned up that could potentially be exposing something that was never intended to be exposed. don't expose IoT, OT, ICS devices ever. That's really what Mirai was targeting, what they were looking for. So don't do it. Other things like console servers, if it's like an OpenGear serial server or KVM, any sort of administrative ports and services like SQL, RDP, CIFS, don't allow that in, and honestly, don't allow it out. So I need to refine the slide and really say it shouldn't go either way. I would really encourage everyone, look at your outbound firewall rules and make sure that they're not overly permissive to just allowing any service out to the internet, and that you're not letting users do these sort of like raw mappings. So with that, I know I'm pretty much like right at time. It was a lot of content to get through, but hopefully, somebody, you at least found it entertaining, and hopefully found some things that may be helpful, for you to go checking out in your environment. With that, are there any questions, any feedback, anything like that?
Yep, we got some questions for you. Of course, we got someone asking for the slides. I don't know if we could send these ones out or not, but I can get with you offline on that. But in either case, this is recorded and will be on YouTube, so you can kind of get the slides there if we can't send it directly. We'll figure that out. But the technical question was, how can we prevent the exfiltration of data via Postman without stopping the use of Postman? Is this a QUIC vulnerability?
So I don't believe Postman would use QUIC, because I'm going to assume what we're really talking about is just using Postman for APIs, for API access. So I think the question probably becomes more about what users are manipulating APIs for, whether that's your own APIs or another vendor's APIs. So I think what you probably would want to be looking at is, okay, testing APIs, data in it is stored outside the company. That's a very good question. I would say,
yeah, why don't whoever asked that was anonymous. If you want to tell me your real name, we can research and get back to you.
My thought would be potentially that we could leverage something like content awareness, potentially like content awareness or DLP. If you're doing HTTPS inspection, we might be able to leverage that to look for specific data types in those posts to the API or what's being pulled in or out. So, this is how we're doing a lot of the ChatGPT filtering right now, where, we're hearing folks maybe don't want to block ChatGPT entirely, but they're worried about things like source code, or financial data being transacted through ChatGPT. So my thought would be to consider, if you need HTTPS inspection, to consider the ability of leveraging something like content awareness to potentially to write a rule to look specifically at the traffic going to that API and try to flag data types in it that you wouldn't want coming or going.
Okay. Second, oh, wait a minute.
Yes. Second scenario, the remote access solution. So that is part of Harmony Connect. If you've been around the Checkpoint world long enough, that was part of the Checkpoint's Odo acquisition. But it's the Checkpoint Connect for applications, and it lets you do basically like a reverse proxy. So you don't even need to expose anything out to the public internet for it to work. We do it through a Docker container, and you can deliver things like web apps, RDP, SSH through a single web dashboard. It just uses HTML5. And actually, if they're doing RDP, you can even get like a video DVR session of what the user did when they were connected to RDP. If they're using SSH, we actually record all of the commands that they enter and input through the terminal. And if it's a web app, we record all of the post gets, things like that. So it's completely auditable. So that would be the thing you're probably asking about, Jason. And if you already have Docker in your environment, honestly, it sets up in like 10 minutes. It's super easy.
Yep. I think that covered the questions. We're a little over anyway. So thank you, Dan. Great info. Yeah, if you are not aware of these workshops, please talk to your account team. They're very impactful for the company. the investment, like Dan said, is a no fee service. Your only investment is time. We can look at your security environment. We can be specific, right, Dan? If you just want to look at your cloud or your IoT, whatever your highest concern is. This is really helpful for you to not only develop a security plan moving forward, but show you any gaps you have now that you can help remediate. So, please use us for this feature. It's really incredible and helps you out quite a bit. And you can see the stuff that Dan is finding is really, really interesting. So hopefully we'll hear from you soon on that. Oh, do we have another question?
Yeah, Mark, to your question, my email address is on the slide. If you just want to email me, I can tell you who that is. We can find that out. And then if you have concerns about ChatGPT filtering, one of the SEs who's on the session wrote a fantastic white paper on it. So I would be happy to share that white paper with you as well, if you have some concerns about that. And honestly, even if it's not ChatGPT related, you could just take kind of the concepts of that white paper and apply it to something other than ChatGPT. So if you want to just email me, I'm happy to pass all that along to you.
Yep.
And that goes for anybody else. You got my email there, my LinkedIn, whatever's easiest to find me. I'm generally around in all the different checkpoint channels and things. So thanks everybody for your time. These were great questions, great conversations. And always, Rob, thank you for hosting.
No, thank you for the information, Dan. Yeah, this obviously, like I said, is recorded. We'll put that up on the YouTube channel. We'll also have the follow-up email with some reference content, some more information about the workshops themselves. So again, talk to your account team or reach out to Dan or I directly if you don't know where to go, and we'll help you navigate that. But with that, did we get another question here?
Looks like they just want to be
added to my yes. Short answer, yes. Curtis. Yeah, I'll make sure I add that let me just copy it now before I lose it. Sorry, guys. Okay. Okay, lost my train of thought now. Okay, we're follow-up email will be going out. Our next webinar will be in 2 weeks. You'll see the invitation for that soon. But thanks again for joining us. We will see you here next time. Enjoy your day. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, everybody.